Nestled in the basin of a sagebrush flat just south of Kanab, Utah, a county water project has brought attention to this community, though not for the reasons you might expect. During the construction of the Jackson Flat Reservoir, experts running a routine impact test stumbled upon the ruins of an ancient culture that dates back nearly 7,000 years. The Jackson Flat Reservoir is not only a landmark of recreation and water conservation, it is also a monument to an ancient culture that lived upon this very spot and called this valley home.
Water is the life-giving part of a culture, and so all cultures have to find water. Wherever there's water, there's an ability to grow crops. There's also an attraction for animals and wildlife.
At Jackson Flat, the role of water was extremely important. The first farmers started farming here around probably maybe 200 BC.
Water was just as important to the prehistoric people as the cultures nowadays. The majority of the large structural habitation sites where people lived for a while and then came back to through the generations are always on these creeks. Kanab Creek, Short Creek, the Virgin.
Then as the white man came into the area, they located themselves on streams and on spring areas. It's very important that you have a backup supply of water and that you're able to put your water to beneficial use at the best time of year, the maximum production from the maximum amount of water. So we're dependent upon the Kanab Creek for our water, plus also what we get out of the Navajo sandstone. So we decided we needed to build a reservoir to store water in the wintertime to maximize the water that we've been blessed with. This used to be a farm. It was owned by the Jackson family, and it was a natural location, a natural place to put it with this basin here. We had to do a full environmental assessment for the Army Corps of Engineers, plus we did some preliminary studies on the site ourselves to make sure that the land and the area here would hold water and would not wash out.
Well, we were involved with the design and construction of this project from the very beginning. The owner hired an engineer, investigated the site conditions that justified the kind of design that they were proposing for the stamp to be sure that it would operate and function properly and that it would also meet the state safety standards.
We did an archaeological investigation and we came up with some sites, but we eventually found a lot more ancient historic sites and also human remains than we ever anticipated finding out here.
My first impression of the project was that it was big, it was massive, it was a huge undertaking. We dug backhoe trenches every 5 yards across the site, so we would know where all the houses are and all the features. What we do is we read the soil in the backhoe trenches. We look at the wall of the trench to see what soil changes there are. A floor of a house will be very compacted, and you can actually see that. We learned that we had some very large pit houses, and we had a dense concentration of pit houses.
Pit houses are circular, semi-permanent earth dwellings carved several feet into the native sandstone. Flat rocks and mud coat the earthen walls to keep the structure from collapsing in on itself. Over the pit, poles and brush are covered with mud, providing a cool retreat from the summer heat and warmth in the winter. Upon the owner's death, these crude homes were often burned and in some cases actually used as graves.
One of the pit houses was 9 yards across. This huge house had 2 other structures built after the big one was abandoned. The other thing which we discovered are big bell-shaped pits, and these were used by the first farmers to store corn. Biggest site under the dam, we call it 2042 KA 6165. They all have numbers. Contains 30 pit houses, the remains of 30 pit houses. And although we haven't done any radiocarbon dating yet, we know from the pottery and from the architectural styles of those houses, we believe that site was occupied between about AD 200 and AD 1050. And then there was one site, it seems to have been occupied in the early historic period because a metal arrowhead was found. And we had some research questions pertaining to the Dominguez and Escalante expedition that came through the region in 1776 from Mexico. And these Catholic priests who led the expedition were the first Spanish explorers to come through the region. Every time you open a site, you really are never sure what you're going to find. So there's a certain amount of respect and gravity when you begin the project. Every archaeological site is kind of like a cemetery, and we need to be respectful.
We actually worked with a number of Indian tribes, the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Paiute, and we had a good relationship with them. We worked well with them. These are their ancestors, and they were concerned that they would be put back in the ground as quickly as possible under Utah state law. With the human remains, they would actually take those remains and bury them in a different location. So with the fact that we could work with them on a conservation easement and put the human remains back, their ancestors back in the ground, very close to where the archaeologists located them, I think that made things work better.
This site is one of the few in the Virgin Branch, Puebloan area, where sites have been investigated systematically using modern methods, including radiocarbon dating, and the sites span a 7,000-year time period. So we will be able to understand what happened in one place over an extremely long period of time. Some of the cooler things we found was quite a bit of turquoise jewelry. In the Kanab area, many of the sites contain bracelets that are made in the Hohokam style with glosimerous shells, and they can tell us a lot about trade and relationships between different groups of people.
If these developmental projects didn't go on, we would not have the opportunity to do some of the large-scale excavations that have been done in this part of Utah. Many of the reservoirs that have been put in southwestern Utah, Gunlock, in Quail Creek, Sand Hollow, all of these reservoirs are located in places where there were many archaeological sites. So we have to look at it in that way, that we are fortunate that we've been able to get in and do excavation and recover data and learn more about the Anasazi or the other prehistoric cultures here.
Through the efforts of the Native American community and the Kane County Water Conservancy, roughly half of this site and major portions of the other sites will be preserved in perpetuity as a conservation area. So thanks to both the Native American community and Kane County Water Conservancy.
The Anasazi were a culture that were able to prolong a lifestyle in this environment, be successful, grow the population, and live with the resources that were here. And I think there's important lessons for us to learn nowadays about how to live within our environment in a manner that does not waste what we have. I think that the Jackson Flat Reservoir Project and the archaeological evidence that they've been finding there is really significant and important to this area, and the fact that the project was able to find a fairly extensive early Basketmaker II settlement in this area that hasn't been seen. It really is going to add a lot to our knowledge of the Virgin Anasazi in this area.
This project has been a goal of mine and of our Water District Board for many, many years. With this particular reservoir here, where we can store 4,228 acre-feet of water, we will be able to have a continual flow of water throughout the growing season. In addition to that, we think it's going to be a great amenity for the people of Kane County and others that visit this area. With over 200 acres of surface area, we plan to plant fish in here. We've got plans for hiking trails around the area and for people to come in and do some water sports, swimming, and potentially boating. So it's going to be a great blessing to people here in this area to have this huge amount of water. Water is always a great attractant for people. They'll come here. It's a wonderful thing.